My first life ended beneath the ruins of history. My name was Wei An. I was a historical archivist, a man who spent his days breathing in the dust of forgotten dynasties and preserving the fragile history of the world. I held no belief in magic, fate, or the supernatural. My existence was quiet, methodical, and entirely unremarkable. That is, until the great earthquake struck. I was deep in the subterranean vaults of the National Museum when the tectonic plates shifted. The ceiling gave way with a deafening roar. I remember the terrifying sound of crushing stone, a blinding flash of pain, and then a profound, heavy darkness. I expected the void, a quiet non-existence. I did not expect to wake up choking on the metallic scent of blood, my entire body feeling as though it had been submerged in boiling magma. My eyes snapped open. The air in the room was heavy, biting against my lungs, yet my skin was searing. I tried to sit up, but a sharp, agonizing phantom pain flared in my spiritual center. It felt as though a living, breathing coal had been embedded into my chest. Before I could even process the physical trauma, a tidal wave of foreign, horrific memories crashed into my mind. The sheer force of the mental intrusion made me grip my head, my breath hitching as 2 lifetimes merged into one. I was no longer Wei An. I was Bai Chen, a former disciple of the prestigious Righteous Heaven sect, a young man who had been utterly betrayed. Weeks ago, his sect elders realized they were losing the war against the demonic faction. In an act of supreme cowardice, they decided to offer a peace tribute to the demonic emperor. But it was a trap. They had forcefully implanted a demonic entity into Bai Chen's spiritual core, a Hellfire Parasite. It was a vicious, untamable toxin that manifested as glowing, jagged red veins crawling up his neck and across the right side of his face. The parasite was designed to detonate upon contact with immense cold, effectively turning Bai Chen into a walking, breathing biological bomb meant to assassinate the emperor. To ensure the demonic guards did not see the glowing veins and uncover the assassination plot, the elders had bound his hands and forced a wide bamboo hat draped with a thick, dark veil, a Wei Mao, over his head. The original Bai Chen had died of sheer terror and the agonizing heat of the parasite just moments before my soul took over his body. I slowly raised my hands. I tested the weight of the silver chains rattling at my wrists. Beneath the fabric of my veil, the skin of my right cheek throbbed with a sickly, searing heat. I was a walking bomb, yes, but panic would only accelerate the fuse. Survival required observation. I looked around through the sheer dark fabric. I was kneeling on the polished dark floor of an immense, cavernous throne room. Beside me stood 2 trembling elders from the Righteous Heaven sect, holding the ends of my chains. They were here to deliver their gift. "Keep your head down, you wretched boy," one of the elders hissed at me under his breath. "When the emperor touches you, let the parasite detonate. Do not fail the righteous path." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I calculated the distance to the exit and the terrifying spiritual pressure pressing down on the room. Running was impossible. Detonating meant my own death. Then the temperature in the grand hall plummeted. The braziers lining the walls did not flicker. They simply froze solid, the flames turning into sculptures of red ice. The sudden drop in pressure hit the room like a physical shockwave. The elders beside me began to violently shiver, their breath pluming in the air. The massive iron doors at the end of the hall groaned open. A man walked through the shadows. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator who knew nothing in the world could threaten him. He wore flowing robes of pure white silk, embroidered with silver threads that caught the dim light. A heavy cloak of snowfox fur rested over his broad shoulders. His features commanded terror, sharp, rigid, and carved from white jade. His skin carried an unnatural, translucent pallor, and his eyes were a piercing silver. He looked less like a man and more like a winter storm condensed into human form. I scoured Bai Chen's memories. Emperor Mo Han, the ruler of the Demonic Sect, the undisputed tyrant of the northern wastes. Mo Han did not spare a single glance at the terrified righteous elders. His eyes swept over the floor and locked directly onto me. Even through the dark fabric of my veil, I felt the physical weight of his gaze. It was piercing, an assessing pressure that made the air thin. "Your Imperial Majesty," the lead elder stammered, dropping to his knees and pressing his forehead against the frosted stone. "The righteous Heaven Sect brings you this tribute, a beauty of unparalleled spiritual purity as a token of our surrender." Mo Han walked closer. The air grew so bitter my lungs ached. He stopped just a few feet away, looking down at me. "A beauty." Mo Han's voice was a resonant baritone, carrying a quiet authority that vibrated through the floorboards. "You wrap him in heavy veils and bind him in silver-suppressing chains. Does the righteous sect think me a fool? Your Majesty, it is only to preserve his modesty." "Silence." Mohan raised a single pale finger. In an instant, the two elders were encased in solid, unbreakable blocks of black ice. They didn't even have time to scream. I knelt there with a straight spine, keeping my chin level. If I detonated now, I died. If I angered him, I died. Mohan stared at me. "You do not tremble. You do not beg. You know what you are carrying inside you, do you not?" He knew. Of course he did. He was the Emperor. "I am aware of the Hellfire Parasite, Your Majesty," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly measured. "But I have no intention of detonating it. I prefer to live." Surprise flickered briefly behind Mohan's eyes. The rigid set of his jaw relaxed a fraction. "Practical," Mohan murmured. "Take off your chains. Follow me." With a flick of his wrist, the silver restraints shattered into dust. The journey into the inner sanctum of the Imperial Palace took only moments, but the silence between us was heavy. I was escorted into a massive, opulent bedchamber. The walls were decorated with intricate tapestries, but the hearth was empty. There were no fires burning here. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut, leaving me alone with the Emperor. Mohan stood by the window, looking out at the frozen mountains. He slowly untied the heavy fur cloak from his shoulders and let it fall to the floor. He turned to face me. Without his heavy cloak, the subtle details beneath his terrifying facade became visible. I noted the faint, involuntary tremors in his fingers, and a jagged, unnatural pattern of frost spreading up his neck, pulsing with a pale, celestial light. "You are observant," Mohan said quietly, catching my gaze through the veil. "So you see it, the divine frost." "A celestial weapon wound?" I guessed. "A parting gift from the heavenly realm," Mohan stated, pacing slowly across the dark stone floor. "It is a divine curse that is slowly freezing my core from the inside out. My own cultivation cannot fight it. Only the most extreme, lethal heat can melt divine frost." He stopped, turning his piercing gaze toward me. "Your sect thought they were clever, sending a parasite to assassinate me. But the Hellfire Parasite inside you is the exact medicine I need to survive. I do not want it to detonate. I want to extract it from you slowly, to thaw my meridians." I absorbed the information quietly. "Dual cultivation. You want to use me as a medicine furnace?" "Yes." Mohan's gaze dropped to the floor for a brief moment. "But there is a complication." I waited patiently. Mohan stepped closer. "If I forcefully take the hellfire, my brittle meridians will shatter from the shock. I cannot withstand the strain of dominating the energy." My breath caught behind the veil. I understood exactly what he was implying. Mohan lifted his chin, his eyes flashing with a defensive, fierce pride. "To survive the physical backlash, I must absorb your fire passively. You must guide the qi. Therefore, you will take the dominant role in the bedchamber. I will submit to you." The ruler of the demonic sect, the man who made armies tremble, was standing in front of me declaring his total submission. I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer magnitude of his words settle in the heavy air. "I understand," I said finally, keeping my tone perfectly respectful. "I will manage the flow of energy carefully. I will ensure you are not harmed, and in return, you will extract the parasite so it does not kill me." Mohan exhaled a slow, tense breath, the rigid line of his shoulders dropping a fraction. "There are conditions to this arrangement," Mohan continued, his voice returning to its sharp, commanding edge. "First, I will protect you. While you are within these palace walls, no one will harm you." "And the second condition?" I asked. Mohan reached into his robes and pulled out a strip of heavy, spell-woven black silk. "The process of thawing divine frost with hellfire is excruciating," Mohan said softly. "The pain will be beyond human comprehension. If I see you or hear you, my warrior instincts will take over. My body will perceive you as an attacker, and my spiritual pressure will unconsciously crush you to death." He held up the dark silk. "Therefore, I must wear a sensory seal. I will be blindfolded and surrender my senses entirely to prevent my body from fighting back. You must lead the process in total darkness." "Your terms are acceptable, Your Majesty," I said. "We have a deal." "Very well," Mohan said softly, his fingers tightening around the black silk blindfold. "Prepare yourself, Bai Chen, and remember, do not let the fire burn too quickly." The terrifying Emperor of the North was about to surrender all control to me, and somehow, I had a feeling this deal would change both our lives forever. The heavy wooden doors of the bedchamber sealed shut. Across from me, Emperor Mohan stood in the center of the shadows. With a slow, deliberate motion, he tied the spell-woven black silk over his eyes, securing himself in darkness. "The candles," Mohan instructed, his voice tight. Drawing upon the volatile heat of the Hellfire Parasite humming within my chest, I flicked a fraction of its qi outward. One by one, the flames extinguished. We were plunged into pitch darkness. "I have never surrendered my pathways to another," Mohan said, his voice vibrating with tense pride. "If you push the hellfire too fast, my meridians will shatter. If you falter, the divine frost will consume us both." "I do not rush, Your Majesty," I replied. "And I do not break what is placed in my care." In the darkness, Mohan lowered himself onto the bed, surrendering control completely. I guided him backward until he sat heavily on the edge of the mattress. The sensory seal stripped away his usual dominance. He could not anticipate my movements. "I am opening the first gate," I whispered. I visualized the red-hot toxin in my core, channeling the hellfire directly into his freezing pathways. The extraction began. Pure, molten heat poured from my body into his. Mohan gasped, his back arching as the divine frost clogging his meridians clashed with my hellfire. Treating his damaged spiritual network like a fragile manuscript requiring meticulous restoration, I wrapped the parasite's heat around his frozen energy, melting the celestial frost drop by drop. The man who commanded armies was reduced to shivering submission. For an hour, I pushed the hellfire deep into his frozen heart until the lethal ice retreated. When the session finally ended, I stepped back. "The frost has retreated for tonight. Rest, Your Majesty." Over the next few weeks, a strange routine settled over the imperial palace. During daylight hours, Emperor Mohan resumed his role as the merciless tyrant. But I soon realized he was ignoring the basic biological needs of a body fighting a celestial wound, subsisting on cold spiritual pills and working in freezing rooms. Using my archival knowledge of ancient herbalism, I commandeered the kitchens to brew a potent, warming decoction. That evening, before Mohan returned, I entered his private study, reorganized his workspace away from the freezing drafts, and left the steaming herbal brew on his desk. When we met in the dark bedchamber that night, Mohan tied the silk over his eyes. "You entered my study," Mohan said, his voice incredibly guarded. "My royal tasters thought your brew was an assassination attempt. They tested it 3 times, only to conclude it was the most potent organ-warming elixir they had ever analyzed. Why did you do that? You are not my servant. If your internal organs freeze during the day, it requires twice as much energy to thaw them at night," I answered simply. "The brew is preventative maintenance." A quiet, disbelieving laugh escaped him. "Preventative maintenance. You treat the supreme ruler of the demonic sect like a drafty window that needs sealing." "I treat a damaged vessel with the care it requires, Your Majesty." "Come here," he commanded gently. When I reached out to begin the extraction, the dynamic shifted. Mohan leaned forward, actively chasing the contact. He was no longer just submitting to the process, he was craving it. "You do not fear me," Mohan whispered suddenly in the dark. "Everyone fears me. But you take control of an emperor in the dark, and you do not tremble." "Does my lack of fear offend you?" I asked, pooling the heat warmly around his heart. "No," Mohan breathed out. It anchors me." A dangerous spike of alarm rang through me. "Your Majesty, remember the terms. I am merely a vessel for the cure." But the line had already been crossed. Over the next month, the boundary of our clinical contract began to blur. Mohan began seeking out my presence during the day. While I sat in the secluded gardens reading scrolls, the Emperor would silently appear, sitting beside me just to bask in the ambient heat radiating from the parasite within me. He was like a freezing man slowly inching closer to a blazing hearth. And I found myself unable to push him away. I was protecting his physical heart from the ice, but I had entirely failed to protect my own. And in the cultivation world, emotional attachments were often deadlier than poison. 3 months had passed since our contract was forged. Inside the timeless walls of the Imperial Palace, my routine had become unshakable. I spent my days organizing the library and brewing medicinal teas, optimizing his environment to keep the cold at bay. The truth I fiercely tried to ignore was that Emperor Mohan was systematically dismantling every wall I possessed. One late afternoon, Mohan returned from a military tribunal. As the heavy doors clicked shut behind him, leaving us alone, the rigid posture of the tyrant evaporated. Without a word, he knelt beside me and rested his head against my shoulder. Through my robes, his cheek felt like biting ice. He was shivering, his internal temperature dangerously low. "Do not move, Bai Chen," Mohan murmured, his eyes closed. "Just for a moment. Let me rest here." The Emperor of the North, a man who could level mountains with a flick of his wrist, was seeking refuge against the shoulder of a disgraced tribute. Instead of pushing him away, I shifted to block the harsh wind, pouring a careful trickle of hellfire energy to thaw his trembling muscles. Mohan was becoming entirely dependent on my presence, and I was becoming fiercely devoted to protecting him. That night, the tension that had been building between us finally reached its breaking point. In the pitch-black bedchamber, Mohan tied the dark sensory seal over his eyes. I guided the searing hellfire from my chest down into his freezing pathways. Stripped of his vision and his imperial defenses, he surrendered entirely to my control, breathless sighs echoing in the quiet chamber. But as I pushed the fire downward, Mohan's hands, frantic and seeking in the dark, found my arms. His freezing fingers gripped me with shocking strength, pulling me down until my chest hovered mere inches above his own. "Bai Chen," he gasped. "Focus on the qi," I instructed, my heart pounding. "You are distracted. The celestial ice is resisting." "I do not care about the ice," Mohan breathed out. His hands slid up from my forearms to grip my shoulders. The dynamic of the session violently shifted. He was actively trying to pull me closer. "Your Majesty," I warned, "you must remain still." "Stop," Mohan pleaded. It was the first time I had ever heard the Emperor beg. I froze, terrified of triggering a detonation. Still blindfolded, Mohan pulled himself upward until he was sitting on the edge of the mattress, his face inches from the dark veil concealing my own. "For 30 years," Mohan whispered into the suffocating space between us, "I have lived in a fortress of unyielding cold. I was taught that warmth is a weakness that will get you killed. And then you walked into my palace. You take complete control over my life in the dark, and you ask for nothing in return. You are the only source of warmth I have ever known." "Mohan," I said, panic tightening my throat. "Stop speaking. You are violating the contract." "The contract means nothing," Mohan cried out, pulling me flush against his bare, shivering chest. "I do not care that I cannot see your face. I only know that when you leave this room, the cold returns and I cannot bear it anymore. Bai Chen, I love you. I want you to stay by my side, not as a vessel, but as my equal. I want..." And that is exactly where we're leaving our frozen emperor tonight. After 3 months of resisting, Mohan finally shattered the wall around his heart. But Bai Chen's panic wasn't because of the confession. It was because the divine frost feeds on emotional weakness. And Mohan had just exposed his heart completely. Did the curse strike? Did Bai Chen stop it in time? The extended director's cut and full continuation are already waiting on Patreon if you want to continue their journey right now. Link in description and pinned comment. I'll see you in the next story.